So I'm Sue Daly. I'm Associate Director for Tech and Innovation at techUK. You saw me earlier if you were here. So I am not Luciana Floridi, but I'm going to do probably a very poor woman's job of being Luciana Floridi and chairing our final panel of the day, which is all about what's coming next. And I've got a great panel that I'd like to invite to come up. So Kate Devlin, Tom Meakin, Catherine Miller, come on up, Jenny Murindi and Mike Phillips. If you want to take your seats. So really, we've been talking today about how much progress we've been making, right? And where are we on the journey? Although I hate that phrase because it makes me sound like I'm on X Factor. Believe me, you don't want me to start singing. So what we want to talk about now is, I think, something that I mentioned earlier on in the opening panel today around making sure we also have, as well as looking at where we are in the progress we're being made, about that. How do we make sure we have that ethical foresight? How do we make sure that we're looking ahead, as well as the time that we're doing the doing? So what's coming next? What's coming down the line? What are the issues? What are the topics? What are maybe some of the issues that Stephanie just raised? What are the key issues that we should also be thinking about? Future issues that we should be concerning ourselves with and making sure that we consider, as well as I said this morning, that we're doing the doing. So it's really about where is the debate going in the years ahead, reflecting on what we've heard from today, but also looking at 2020 and beyond. And are we doing this right? Are we getting this right? What more can be done? And maybe by who? One of the challenges we had last year by Natalie Banner, who was one of the brilliant chairs of the session today, was who's not in the room that should be in the room. So perhaps that's something we can get into as well. With Liz Denham talking this morning about we need more voices in this debate and discussion. So whose voice isn't here? So maybe that's a question as well. Great panelists. I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves. We're going to kick off a few questions here, and then we'll have questions by Slido and also old school. If anyone wants to ask a question, they can in the room. So perhaps we'll start at that end. Mike, do you just want to introduce yourself, say who you are, where you come from, as they say?
Sure, happy to, and this is working. Okay, great. I'm Mike Phillips. I am an Assistant General Counsel at Microsoft. I've been at the company for about 20 years in a variety of mostly product development support roles. So I've counseled any number of enterprise and consumer products over my time at the company. The reason I'm here today is because over the last 2.5 years, I've been directly involved in our early work to begin developing an ethical approach to AI, our responsible AI principles, and now I'm closely involved in the work that we're doing to turn those into practice, and our current work to build out infrastructure and really reduce some of these concepts into things that our engineers can work with. That takes up most of my time. So I'm over from Redmond for this conference, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us today, and I think that sounds enough to be taking up your time. Jenny.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Mundy. I am the Managing Director for Visa across the UK and Ireland. Visa has a lot of data. We process over 182 billion transactions globally last year. It's quite staggering. And AI and ML is not something new to Visa. We started working with that back in the 90s, actually. But what is true is that it's becoming a very critical part of pretty much every product, every solution that we have today and that we're working on in terms of concept. We kind of think about it in three areas. How do we use it to make our business better? How do we use it to make our clients' businesses better? And actually, how do we use it to make a positive impact on the world we live in? And we've got various focus areas going on across all of those. Above all for us, trust is paramount. When you use, particularly with Visa, we're a very, very trusted brand. Trust means everything to us. And we will hold a very, very high standard and hold ourselves to a very high standard to ensure that we can always live up to that.
Great. Catherine, great to have you in a new role.
In a new role, fresh out the box. Sorry, do you just want introductions, or do you want me to launch into
introductions and perhaps tell us what are the issues that we're not talking about, and then we'll touch on Mike and Jenny as well. That we should be going forward. She says, dropping up. Can't control it. It's fine. Don't worry.
So I'm Catherine Miller. I'm interim CEO of .Everyone as of about 2 weeks. Before that, I was our Director of Policy. And so .Everyone, for those of you who don't know us, we are the responsible technology think tank, and we're really here to fight for better technology for everyone. And I think the thing that's really encouraging about the conversation that we're having here, and in fact the fact that it's techUK that's hosting it, is something that's very much what is at the heart of who we are, which is about action. And getting beyond talk, let's not talk ethics, let's make tech better for everyone, let's make it differently. And I think, you know, the thing that we really need to nail now is how to operationalize this conversation, get it out of the conference rooms and embedded into people's organizations and ways of working.
Brilliant. Tom, great to have you with us.
Wonderful to be here.
And just tell everybody about you and your job and what you do at Quantum Lab.
Perfect. So Tom Meakin, it's great to be with you all. I'm a partner at McKinsey. I'm also Chief Operating Officer of Quantum Black, which is McKinsey's Center of Excellence and Innovation for AI and ML. You asked earlier, what is the question we're not asking? I think we're not having enough debate for me. I was very struck by what Stephanie said earlier. AI holds enormous promise in terms of reducing biases, but it also has the ability to bake them in and scale them in a way that humans on our own can't, and will ultimately always rely on human judgment around some pretty big topics. You know, what does fairness look like? What is individual right versus the right of the collective? How does geopolitics play? We're trying to figure that out ourselves and with our clients, and I think we need to keep talking about this.
Great, and we'll get into a bit of that as well. Kate,
Hello,
hi.
Sue. Hi, Sue.
Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
So tell everyone about your amazing role, but also then, you know, what are the issues to you that we're not talking about that we should be
So
going forward?
I'm an academic. I'm senior lecturer in social and cultural AI at King's College London. I used to be in a computer science department, but I'm now in digital humanities. So I'm flying the flag for the inclusion of humanities in the discussion, because I was at an event recently, and the keynote speaker, who was someone from STEM, said technology is neutral. As Stephanie just said, that's not true. We know that's not true. From the moment a decision is made about technology, it stops being neutral. So I think we need more of that. And I think one of the things we're not talking about today, or often enough, is the fact that while we're discussing diversity and bias, our community is still incredibly white. So we are missing voices there. We're doing much better on gender equality, but still not good enough in terms of racial equality.
Interesting. So Mike, and we'll come back down the line for Mike and
Sure.
Jenny. From Mike, from your point of view, so what are we not talking about right now that we really should be, or that you would like us to be talking about next year?
Yeah, I'd say it's less what we're not talking about, but I don't think what we're not talking about enough, if that makes sense. And that is, understandably right now, again, a lot of the focus is on how do we collectively as a society move from this state where we have plenty of principles, plenty of frameworks, essentially saying the same thing, which I think is a reason for optimism. But how do we move from principles to practice? And my worry in that is that we're skipping over some steps that are going to be really critical. I definitely think there's tremendous pressure to make these principles more real in the products and services that we build. And so we can't navel gaze, we can't wait too long. But I also worry that there's a little bit too much pressure to great. Give me the tools then that will help me make my system fair, and let's get on with this. These issues are just so incredibly complex. I have a colleague who is also a client, a woman by the name of Hannah Wallach, who is one of our lead researchers in New York City, who some of you folks may know. She and I co-chair an internal working group on fairness and bias. And she loves the term socio-technical. She says it so often, I told her I was going to get it tattooed right here on my arm so I'd never forget it. But she's absolutely right. The notion of fairness in particular in AI systems is a profound socio-technical challenge, meaning in her words, it cannot be solved simply by technical or by sociological means. It's going to require a combination. And that mindset is one that I don't think really exists today. We have a number of different disciplines involved who are all very critical to this conversation. They need to come together. But I think more work needs to be done, and frankly, more just practical testing and application needs to happen before we can feel confident that we've really reduced some of these principles like fairness into true practice. So again, I'd say it's not that we're not talking about that, and again, I think the pressure to produce real action is legitimate, but I worry we're not getting deep enough on precisely how it is we bring these concepts and notions together to make this more actionable.
And just to your point of missing a few steps, do you feel that there is a danger then of going, okay, well, fairness and transparency, tick box right now, let's move on to accountability, it's been tick box, and then you get that kind of approach?
Absolutely, and as an example, I think the tick box is a perfect one to talk about. Again, Hannah Wallach and some colleagues of hers have recently produced a paper that I think they're going to publish here in the new year, specifically on the topic of checklists as a very important tool in addressing the topic of fairness in machine learning systems. And as a concept, I think a comprehensive checklist will be vital. It'll be very, very important for people to have an ability to baseline and ensure, as they become educated on these issues, have the ability to check through and think very carefully. But the danger that they're finding as they've done research on this topic is that a checklist without the context and without the cultural sensitivities to the use case, the people deploying, even the institutional culture, if these things are jammed through, then we risk creating tools that are misfits and perhaps exacerbating some of these challenges. The example she loves to give is a question that I think she saw on one particular checklist that asked the engineer, did you consider whether there is bias in your data? Yes, no. And of course, without more, someone who's new to this and who's under the pressure of hitting a roadmap deadline for a service to launch might say yes, might say no, but what's the information and the mindset behind that? And so I think it's building that mindset. It's like, how do you get to a point of creating and achieving the mind meld? It's not easy, and I don't know how to do it, but I think that's the conversation that we need to be having.
Yeah. So Jenny, from your perspective and maybe from your sector and your industry as well, what are the issues you see coming forward, or what's kind of on your mindset to-do list next year in terms of what are the issues we're not talking about?
I think I just build on these points because I agree with them. I think number one, making sure we all mean the same thing when we use various words. I think there's always a real risk that my version of transparency and Mike's is different. They may be the same, but we kind of assume we're all saying the same thing. I think we need to watch that. I definitely think the real challenge for all of us is in having to, is the risk of building in today's prejudice in a way that we are then kind of having to live and be defined by that. And we need to take the time to get this right. We've never actually had to write down an order, if you like, of how we want to live and run the world we live in a way that we're doing now. And it's kind of forcing us. We've been able to dodge it up till now, quite frankly, and that's been okay. But now we've got to write it down and we've got to be really clear, and we need to take all the right steps. And it's much, much wider than just the technology team, than the legal team. It's all of us, and it's business together and the world we live in. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges and one of the most important things to get right. I think we do need to keep moving forward, and I think there's a lot of progress been made. I mean, events like this and everyone in this room is playing a really vital part, and it is a borderless subject, and it's something that affects all of us. And I think I share your optimism on it. I think we're now starting, or we're well past the start line, but we are really getting to grips and thinking about how we can move it into action. I know in Visa we're building now the sort of data privacy and principles and the ethics into our education and our training of our product designers and developers. So it starts right at the point, so you can't just say, at the end of a piece of code, yes, I've done that, and move on. I think that's it's a great one, but it's so important to the fundamental way we work.
So we had that's great. We had a Tech for Good panel earlier, and James Hodge, who I'm not sure he's still here from Splunk, was actually saying, I want to stop not I want to stop talking about technology. He'll kill me if I say that, but let's not talk about technology so much. Let's talk about people and the impact, and that's where we've always talked about that at the summit. But what Mike's talking about is a mindset change. So it makes me think, Kate, is this a technology issue, or is this a people issue, and this is a societal? How do we change the minds of society? How do we get that mindset change?
I wish I knew. So I'm going to sort of fly the flag for the humanities, but I would say that what we need to see is a move towards design-led, user-centered AI. And we've seen what happened in software engineering over the years when you start to introduce human-computer interaction and user experience. So the software becomes not just a tool that can be used by experts, but something that is tailored to suit people. And I think we need to see that happen with AI as well. We need to be looking at things like use cases and user journeys. We need to be including people in the design from the very start and trying to make it inclusive and accessible for everyone. And I think that is something that is achievable, but we have to take a step back and slow things down and not just do the whole move fast and break things. I think that is a mistake. That's something that corporations can afford to do, but if we want to approach things ethically, we have to ponder it for a bit and move a bit more slowly.
You don't think we're doing enough of that?
I think we can do more. I think we are caught up in this wave and this hype of AI, and it's been. I'm not complaining. It's been really beneficial. So we're all here because people are excited about this. But we've watched in the past 2 years, really, when this big wave of ethics and ethical papers were coming out and being published, and it's just everyone's caught up with it, and we're rolling along with it. And I think to try and keep up with the technology is always really difficult, and we can see that already. So maybe we need to slow down. And we have to think about the environment that we're creating in as well. We've seen also a lot of issues around things like funding. So there's the Epstein money that MIT found themselves in a little spot of bother over. She said, understating. But there's other things as well. Like, where are we getting our investment from? There's governments with atrocious records in human rights that are investing in technology in this country and other countries. Do we really want that in our tech? I think we have to be really, really scrutinizing the environment that we develop in as well.
Catherine, I'm thinking about kind of how we get individuals, and obviously everyone's done a lot of work around say impact and action and what people are thinking and feeling about these technologies. Is it getting individuals, and we've obviously talked about engagement, is it getting individuals to give that feedback, as Kate said, or is it more we need to think about how these technologies impact groups of societies rather than just individuals, or do you think it's a bit of both going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to think...
We've been very focused on what this means for an individual, right? Do we need to broaden that out?
Yeah, we need to stop thinking about user needs and think about society's needs, because a lot of the impacts of technology are almost imperceptible at an individual level. If you have individually been affected by a biased algorithm, chances are you will never ever know. You cannot seek redress for a harm that you didn't know happened. And I think we need to think much more broadly about how technologies are changing the shape of society as a whole, and how we derive a kind of collective response to that. But I just want to pick up on the point around kind of mindset, because I think there's a really important thing there in terms of, and the conversation that I think is missing is understanding essentially what are the conditions that are required to make responsible technology a reality, to allow people to thrive. And that's a question that points to how individuals operate within organizations, how organizations operate as a whole, but also the entire ecosystem. So where is the funding for startups and scale-ups and coming from, and what pressures and what incentives does that create? What is the regulatory landscape doing that either incentivizes or de-incentivizes responsible technology, and how do we do that holistically? We can't, on the one hand, have a government that's kind of trying to kneecap platforms with regulation and sort of on the social media front, but on the other hand is running an industrial strategy that says AI unicorns are what we want to achieve. But that is not a holistic approach, and these things have to be joined up to create a systemic change that means that the mindsets which enable responsible technology can thrive.
So Tom, it sounds like we need to maybe broaden out the debate and the discussion. Is that what you're seeing as well? Is that kind of we need to think about bringing other issues in?
Hugely. I mean, I think organizations and events like this is a great start, but we need to galvanize a much broader group in these kind of discussions, because these are not really technology discussions. They're not really discussions about AI or ML. They're discussions about how we live as a group of people and how we operate and the kind of societies we want to build.
Yeah.
And those discussions are simply not taking place at anywhere near the scale they need to have, or with the level of honesty that they need to have. And that's kind of on all of us. It's on It's on the academic community, the business community, politicians. And in exactly the way that Catherine said, it will require us to break down these somewhat artificial distinctions, but also recognize how everything is interconnected. Industrial strategy is interconnected to this. The way we vote and the way we participate in politics, which is sort of prescient now, is also linked into this. So no, the discussion is nowhere near the level it needs to be.
But do you get a sense that we're moving in the right direction, though? I won't ask you to go and stand on one side of the room or the other, but well, you can't. No, let's not do that. Do you feel a sense that we are at least moving in the right direction?
Yes, but at nowhere near the pace we need to.
So pace is key. Catherine's nodding. Is pace. We need to quicken up. We need to be doing more.
Yeah.
Everyone's a very impatient organisation. I think. All credit to you guys for holding this debate, but it's not moving. We are treading water. We are having the same conversations with the same people again and then again and again. And if you want my prediction for next year, it's instead of a bunch of frameworks that no one is using, we will get a bunch of ranking systems that no one is using. That will be the next, big whizzy thing, is someone will come up with, I'm going to rank all these companies as gold, silver, bronze on their ethical, It's like, no, let's just do something. Let's stop, reframing the question. And I appreciate what Mike's saying about, getting it right, but we did a piece of research with UK tech workers earlier this year where over a quarter of them had seen something happen at work which they thought would be bad for people in society. They're doing that without a framework, without a ranking system, without a star rating. They can see bad stuff happening. The thing is, they have nowhere to go when that happens. 1 in 5 of them goes out the door. They quit their jobs when they see that happening. That is not a sustainable way to run an industry and to make technology that will affect people's lives.
Mike, I'm curious as to, obviously you are a visitor in this foreign land, you're over from the US. How is the debate and conversation on that side of the Atlantic? And are you seeing themes here that are being picked up over there, or is there any noticeable differences?
Yeah, the themes are very similar. Look, the political dynamic being what it is in the U.S. right now makes a lot of what we see, at least at the federal level, highly unpredictable. To put it mildly, I guess. The debate is happening in sector and use specific scenarios, maybe to a greater degree. Although again, facial recognition is a very, very relevant and hot topic here. I think it's probably the hottest topic in the U.S. right now in this space, and so a lot of what is happening in terms of developing thinking on these broader themes is happening in the context of facial recognition. And I actually think that's okay. I mean, I do think trying to come up again with notions of what it means to be fair in quotes, in AI in quotes, is again very broad and very difficult. And while I think thematically you can come up with some guidance and some things you want to achieve, to do that in a vacuum is nearly impossible and almost meaningless. And so again, you're going to have to examine certain domains, certain use cases, and facial recognition, I think, is a good one for that reason. It's forcing us to have a dialogue with more specific scenarios and real rights impacted, all of that stuff at the fore. And that very much is what I think is happening in the US right now. Certainly at a state level, you're seeing some activity driven largely by some of the advocacy groups to try and put bans or moratoria on the use of the technology. And I think that's driving a very valuable debate. More generally, I think, though, my sense is that, at least at the government level, the conversations aren't as advanced as they are here in the UK or in Europe. Again, I think, depending upon who you talk to, at a national level, again, there is interest in a concept like algorithmic accountability. My feeling right now is that when that concept is thrown out in proposed legislation, it's just not as specific as I'm seeing here in Europe. It's easy to say, hey, look, if you're going to use an automated decision-making system in certain high-stakes scenarios, you've got to be accountable, and you've got to do a risk assessment, full stop. And that's sort of, that's great, and how do we do that? And it kind of gets left to get figured out. And my sense is that In the UK and in Brussels, for example, there's more specific thinking. But again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier, which is there is a commonality, I think, in the way people are beginning to think about the implications of the technology. And again, I feel that's a positive thing. There's a shared view of the challenges.
Yeah, yeah. We've got some questions on the slide, and we'll go to the room as well. I want to leave enough time. But just to touch on the point that raised earlier, and actually that came out of the summit last year of who's not in the room. And Kate, you raised about making sure we've got diversity in this debate discussion. How do we get more people and more groups that we need to have part of this discussion? How do we get them to be part of it? Still, What's the answer?
I wish I had an answer, because I've heard the same questions about women in tech over the years, and it's really, really hard. I guess start by inviting people and reaching out and trying to get more people platformed on the stage. I don't know. I want to find out. But like I said, we've for years and years and years we've had these discussions. Why aren't there more women in tech? Why don't And I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think we need role models who, at the top that we can say, great, there's visibility there, but we also need a much lower level, like a grassroots level. In schools, we need to be encouraging people to take up the roles as well. So I think there is, for me, that's always been a way of having that representation there, but also encouraging as well. So certainly when it comes to things like women in tech, we know that change happens, that starts to happen at the sort of end of primary school.
Yeah.
And that's when you should be trying to encourage people to go in. So it does mean fundamental changes in curriculum. It means educating from a young age. It means encouraging. It means quotas. It means helping people. It means bursaries. It means all sorts of things, but we should be offering that.
And Tom, industry have a role to play there as well, right? By encouraging the change we all want to see is, be the change you want to see. How can industry want to get this right as well, right?
Yeah, hugely. And I think it starts by recognizing the facts. I mean, we've done a bunch of research that proves that more diverse teams make better decisions and drive better economic outcomes. So, no longer is this about some sort of amorphous societal benefit. There is a shareholder or a stakeholder value to thinking that diversity is a good thing. And then, in addition to some of the structural interventions, I also think transparency is a really good thing. And the increasing emphasis on reporting gender balance or ethnic balance in organizations at different levels, looking at pay gaps. I mean, we look at it very, very carefully, in QB, in terms of our hiring as well. And we've got more work to do, but we're making progress.
Yeah.
So industry plays an incredibly important role. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Got a question on Slido, which Jenny is a question for Mike and Jenny, but I'm going to go with Jenny. How do global companies like yours reconcile cultural differences of understanding what is ethical? So a little bit like what you're talking about, using the terminology. So if you're having this as a global conversation, how do you reconcile the cultural differences with what people would consider or could consider to be ethical?
I think, so firstly, I think data ethics can, at the highest level, can transcend cultures. There's some sort of human rights type things, which are categories which I think are really important. And actually, that sort of almost sits above culture. I think as well for us, and for large organisations where you have a common brand that stands for a common set of brand principles and the data ethics that then come along with that, making sure that we're consistent is really important, and making sure that we take whatever is the highest, so take GDPR, for example. We will apply GDPR across the whole world, not just in Europe. We'll take those principles and we'll make sure we do that once and we do that everywhere. Governance, I think, plays an important role in terms of having some really clear decision making so you can make fast decisions and then implement them globally is really important. So whether it's your data strategy or your data ethics or your principles or how they're approached, good governance and good process can be an accelerator in businesses.
Yeah.
And I think it can lead to Catherine's point around, let's now move into action faster. I spoke at the beginning, Visa, I think we came out yesterday in some poll that we're the second most trusted, respected brand in the world. that feels like an immense privilege, and with that privilege comes a sense of duty and responsibility, and holding that bar very, very high globally, no matter what the culture, I think is absolutely imperative for our success and for the societies we live in, because I think we care a lot about that. We care about making economies thrive and playing our role responsibly.
Question here, which touches a little bit on, go back to Catherine's point about ranking. What are, and perhaps this was probably put in before that comment, but, and this is to anybody, of course, what are the metrics for measuring digital ethics progress? So if it's not ranking, is there a measure, or is there a way of, should we be looking at metrics, or how do we measure, real progress? Going back to Mike's point, it's about making progress. It's about this whole summit. This is putting it into action. It's practical action. So obviously, Catherine, better to anybody, is there a way of measuring this? Should we be trying to measure it? I
think we should. And I think working out what that metric is really, really tricky, because I'm very glad that we've kind of got beyond this in today's conversation. We're getting beyond just ethics and recognizing it's a really challenging conversation about what is the society we want to live in.
And we're doing well in some areas, and we've still got some challenges in others.
But I think the bit we need to get to first is this point around language and sort of substance, because actually if we're all being a bit woolly about what we mean when we say responsible, and everyone can bend the term to suit the needs of their business, then that's really problematic to measure. So we need to start getting down to actually, let's not sort of, there are some areas where there will be trade-offs, but there are some things which are just unacceptable. And where are those lines? And then get beyond the point of where ethics is about doing the least terrible thing possible, and actually into a positive vision of what is the vision that we're all striving for, and measuring against that. But it's hard, right?
Any of the other panelists want to touch with that, Tom?
I mean, I agree. I also tend to think input metrics are slightly more helpful than slightly wonkish output metrics, because and McKinsey is as good as anyone at compiling benchmarks and blah 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 blah. I sort of think that's not the answer, because it's sort of, I think all of us have said debate and encouraging debate is important. So I would look at participation, whether that's sort of gender parity or ethnic parity on some of the decision-making bodies that think about this, whether that's company boards or panels. And then I would frankly look at, are we seeing companies and governments making mistakes publicly? I actually think that is kind of a good thing, because that demonstrates people are experimenting in a way that sort of goes beyond a somewhat narrowly defined group of people who are kind of interested in this to a broader population. And only by doing that do we get anywhere near some of the aspirations that we've all talked about today.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I think what is going to be interesting in the next few years, I hate making predictions, but are we going to end up...
But here it comes.
Here it comes. Okay. Are we going to end up seeing a kind of a wave of machine learning scandals, a bit like PPI, where you've been missold on the basis of an algorithm, when we start getting people claiming? Because it's not unthinkable that could happen. And there are cases where people's data are being used, and they're only finding out about that, and they're starting to get really annoyed. And maybe you'll be missold an algorithm at some point, and there'll be a massive financial hit because of that. But I don't like making predictions.
So you didn't hear it here.
But it gets me worried that at what point will it bite back? Will people be held to account for something that they were missold in the first place?
Interesting. I've got a question here which I wanted to just pose to Mike, because obviously, Mike, you deal with and interact with organisations all the time. Should all organisations have a clear data ethics strategy? If so, should it be a requirement? Is that something that, what do you think?
Meaning private institutions, corporate interests, should they have
a clear data ethics strategy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if by strategy we mean articulating, again, and this is, look, I may overuse the principles notion, but I do think it's critical if you're in this space, and by this space, I think we're talking very broadly about automated systems generally, and I think someone made the point earlier today that most of the magic right now is in machine learning, and I agree with that. if you're working in that space, you're selling solutions, you're building platform technologies, what have you, I absolutely think it's critical right now to have a strategy, which in my mind means you do have principles that you adhere to. And again, I think some of this comes as a function, in some cases, of brand. Some of it comes depending upon the breadth of the company, as being a player, a global citizen, and working globally across these kinds of issues. But I think to not have a strategy to deal with these issues reactively or tactically is a recipe for disaster. Now, having said that, I think you can be as strategic as you want. You can have very elegant principles and go out and talk the talk. And in many cases, you really are only as good as the latest bad headline. And I think people need to basically accept that there are going to be bad headlines. There are going to be mistakes. It's been well said, I think, throughout the day that, look, we are endowing machines with cognitive abilities that we typically consider to be human-like. And if anyone can find me the single human being who's never made a mistake, never acted with bias, never been incapable of fully explaining why it is they made a particular decision, that would be a remarkable day. And so I think we need to accept that, look, there will be mistakes made. We're going to have difficult days. But I don't think you can deal with those effectively and learn from them and improve unless you're thinking strategically and you're driving towards that sort of a principled outcome.
All right, I would take a pause there. Any questions? Oh, there's an arm up on the floor. I think Noreen's going to come and do the David Dimbleby thing. There you go. So you just say who you are as well, and we've got a question at the back.
Hi, Ben Hawes. I work on the Benchmark Initiative for Ordnance Survey on a mid-year, promoting responsible use of location data. I previously worked on government tech policies, starting with TV digital switchover and ending with AI. So I've sort of watched data eating everything for the last 15 years. I want to be a bit Scrooge about this. I think sometimes we talk about this as if we've never had complex autonomous systems, riding roughshod through society. Of course we do. They're called corporations. And they're optimized for quite crude purposes. And there's an increasingly widely held view that as corporations have become optimized for short-term profit and shareholder value, that's been at the expense of consumers and employees and the wider public interest. And in fact, it's quite hard for them to do anything else once they are optimized in that way. So my question is, when those corporations use AI systems, why on earth would we think they would optimize them for any other ways?
Okay, it's a key question. Anybody want to tackle that?
I thought you were going to say airplanes, so I was ready to talk airplanes. But the corporations, that's a zinger. Do you want that one? Look, I think it's absolutely a fair question. And I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that ultimately there is tremendous profit potential for any corporation involved in this space, as with any other technology. I just don't think you'd see the investment if a company didn't see that there was money to be made in this space. Now, having said that, I think there is also a genuine belief in the incredible progress and potential of this technology. And so I think in many ways, and I can say this just from personal experience working with a number of the researchers that I do, and having been at the company as long as I've been through a series of trials and tribulations around antitrust, around privacy and the like, I've never seen the kind of groundswelling and sort of grassroots interest and optimism in the potential for technology to really be used for good, and the importance of really doing these issues well and right. And so again, the folks that I spend most of my time with at work are absolutely committed to this notion of bias and fairness, as an example, are tremendously critical issues. And they can't be dealt with quickly or easily, and yet they must be dealt with comprehensively for us to make progress and do this technology responsibly. And I think that is genuine. And so I think, ultimately the corporations are made up of the people who work for them. And at least, again, I think in the research community that I work with, I'm really encouraged that these are genuine issues of prime interest.
Jenny, I think you wanted to come in.
Just, I guess a build and a slightly different perspective. I agree. I think it's a very fair question. Couple of points though. So I think to be successful as a business, you have to have customers, and customers are not are not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. And I think increasingly they care about the products they use, they care about the businesses they buy from. We care about these things. And we make active decisions depending on that. So I think it's very much beholden on us to make sure that we're giving our consumers, our customers, our businesses, our clients more and more reason to work with us. And also internally, if you want to attract fantastic people and you want a healthy, vibrant, thriving culture and business, making sure that you get this stuff right and that you care about the world you live in and the community you're a part of and the society you belong to is increasingly paramount. I think I certainly see, and I may have gone through as many tech changes as you have, but that's increasingly important for the people in our organizations, and we owe it to them to live up to that as well. So I think, it's a fair question. I think there are some good, in a way, of just a societal way the society is moving that gives some checks and balances in there. And then the last point I make is just on regulation. So I think the regulators play, if I look just within the UK in the financial services space, we've got the ICO, we have the Bank of England, the FCA, all of them looking into this. I think that's a good thing. I think the regulators can play a key role. I guess my ask of them is that it's coordinated, clear and simple and something we can all work with, but I think that has a part to play as well.
Okay, I think everyone wants to get on this question now. So Catherine, Kate and then Tom.
I think your skepticism is entirely justified, and I think this is why it's very important that we do not leave it to business alone to define what good is. That is why we need a thriving civil society who will be able to engage on this. We do not have that right now. Everyone, Ada Lovelace, Turing, we are a small number of organisations that are active in this space. A lot of us in the charitable sector are extremely financially precarious, and that is something that will have to change if you are going to have a thriving civil society debate. But fundamentally, it is for society as a whole, and particularly the democratic institutions of a country, to set the terms under which technology is developed and under which businesses operate. And I'm afraid it's for that group of people to decide what good is, and not for the companies that are using technologies for profit to do so.
I think it's key that we're all part of that conversation, which is actually why it's great to have partners in this summit, to help to make sure that happens. Kate.
Yeah, I agree. I share the skepticism. I mean, yesterday I expressed some dissatisfaction on Twitter that the NHS was doing a deal with Amazon to give it its data outside of the copyright that other developers have to adhere to. And there was lots of outcry on Twitter saying, well, look, this isn't patient data, why are you getting so worried? Well, I'm getting worried because I don't think that Amazon are doing this for the good of everyone's benefit. I don't think they're doing it for good. Amazon are doing what Amazon want to do, which is sell more of their voice assistants, and they want to use NHS data to further enable that. It's a show of trust. So I am skeptical about this sort of thing, but I'm also heartened by the amount of people, employees who are prepared to take a stand, and I think that is really, really good. So we've seen Google walkouts over Google's involvement with Project Maven, for example, which has now been picked up by Palantir, who might as well wear a hat saying we are the baddies. But I mean, it's just like, but the very fact. Sorry if there's anyone from Palantir in the room. So we see that people are standing up to what they consider unethical behaviour, and I think that's really heartening. We see it. People calling this out on social media. We saw with Google's advisory tech board that was set up that was disbanded within a week because people were not happy about who was on that board. So I think there's a lot of redress that can happen through social involvement. I'm really heartened by that. I think it's a good thing.
Tom.
I mean, briefly, I think you're right. And in addition to what the other panelists have said, I think one, you'll start to see more intervention for all the reasons we've talked about. Two, you'll also start to see change in investor behavior. So, some colleague of mine did some research a couple of years ago which showed if you look over a 10, 15-year period, actually companies that take long-term actions, defined as various metrics, including investing in capex above a certain threshold, etc., actually significantly outperform by a margin of 2 to 1 short-term companies. And you're starting to see change in sovereign wealth funds and pension fund capital allocation to reinforce that. That doesn't fix it short term, but I do think it means that you start to see a longer term shift.
Great.
That's a good point.
Question at the back, the gentleman.
Yes. Thanks for the panel. My name is Basil. I'm involved
Hang on
in.
1 second, is that mic on?
Hi. Can you hear me?
All right.
Hi. My name is Basil. I've been involved in health tech, med tech, big pharma, and now I'm working on the AI space. My question is, I didn't hear anything today about the fragmentation and the conflicting messages that reach the consumer. So everybody, you want to grow.
Can you just use the mic?
Yeah. So you want to grow the debate and bring more people on board, but the average person is bombarded with so many conflicting messages about what is AI, how it's going to affect them this way, that way, and some of these messages are actually very contradictory to what you are suggesting, and they are targeted. So we are getting into danger of having something about like the environment, so where consumers are listening to so many conflicting messages and then they freeze, and there is no engagement either way. So how can we, as a community, counteract this approach or this?
So how do we make sure that people are engaged and actively engaged and just, I suppose, don't just turn off because it's just too much, right? So how do we get that right balance? Mike, is there something you want to?
Well, it's a great question. I think one suggestion, and I think this is true not only to make sure that we're drawing people into a meaningful conversation who may be outside of the environment where the technology is developed, but I think also for making progress on all the things we talked about today, which is how do we test these ideas? How do we get real data about how these systems are performing and where the problems are arising? And so I think one of the things I'd like to see more of is public-private opportunities to sandbox. Let's trial certain systems that have specific use cases with specific data sets, and let's figure out what works. And as part of doing that, and I think this goes to ensuring that we have diverse voices represented, let's set up some of these sandboxes in ways that we proactively seek out the people who will be impacted so that they can weigh in. And I think the more that happens, where you, again, trial very specific technologies, it just makes these issues so much more real. I think if you do approach the average citizen about, hey, look, how do you feel about AI? I don't even know what you're talking about. Are you talking Terminator? Is this like general AI? Or do you have in mind the Netflix rating system that tells me what movies to watch? It's just it's such a broad, wide topic. It's hard to make progress. And so I think I'd like to see more of that, where we find opportunities to really trial in live environments, but with the right guardrails, so that we're not affecting people in unknown or dangerous ways. And let's solicit feedback that way.
I think education is really key here, and I have a 9-year-old who is being taught about internet safety in school. Why we should be telling them, the school children as well, about all of this kind of thing. On one hand we're saying, a humanities degree isn't worth anything, and then on the other hand we're saying, but we've got all this fake news and we don't know how to deal with it. Well, maybe, just maybe, we can build that in. Anyone who's done history at school will have learned about how to evaluate sources. So perhaps that's something we bring into schools, and when people leave, and I think a lot of people have suggested this, that by the time someone leaves school, they should be educated in what it is to have a digital presence online and what it is to interact with the technologies we have. And I think it's really fundamental. It's become a life skill that we need. So I would start with education at a pretty young age on this.
Catherine, did you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, so you're banging the drum for humanities, I'm banging the drum for civil society, because I think in most areas of life, we don't as individuals have to go about worrying about issues. I don't understand very much about nuclear energy and nuclear safety, but I kind of can go about my life without fearing apocalypse, because I know there's a decent regulator, and I also know there's a bunch of people who really do care about nuclear safety, who will be on the back of the regulator and of the industry if something is not up to scratch. So it's having that balance of not expecting the individual to have to spend their day going, oh my goodness, what algorithm am I dealing with now? But feeling secure that there's an environment that has, democratic checks and balances, but also those sort of active interest groups who are standing up on their behalf and making sure that everyone is keeping to the deal that they've said they'd signed up to.
So we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm going to be a horrible chair I think Kate might get out of this because she's already done hers. In terms of maybe, or maybe one issue that, you know, the topic is what's coming next. So one issue that you think we're really going to be talking about, we're really going to need to get to grips with next and maybe next year. So I'm going to be horrible. Tom, what do you think? What would be the top of your to-do list?
The relationship between AI, individual government actors, and industry at a either country or regional level.
So at a geopolitical kind of level as well.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that, you know, we've seen 20 years of globalization, and I think you're seeing some forces that are beginning to pull that back. And I think that poses profound questions on how governments and industry actors interact with one another, and those issues are magnified by AI.
Jenny, what would be on yours?
I think I'd say moving into action. I think, and I'd sort of build on that and just say we need more action, but we also need to be focused on building out that diversity. Yeah. And I think both of those two things together, as we go into next year, will be the prime focus.
Catherine?
This might be more of a wish than an actual prediction.
I mean, it's Christmas. You can have a wish.
I would like to see...
I'll be your fairy godmother then.
I'd like to actually see the pendulum swing back a little bit, because I think we're now at a point where almost any bad thing that is happening is getting pinned on tech. And I think I'd like to see a bit of a disaggregation of what's the bad tech bit and what is people being bad. And we've got to, you know, there are some things that we already know how to do. Like, we have a committee on standards in public life. Why don't we just ask people to behave properly when they operate in public life? Instead of saying the fact that a political party can rename their Twitter account in the middle of a debate is a tech problem. No, that is a person behaving badly problem. So let's start to disaggregate those. I'm all for dealing with the bad tech, but let's focus on what is the bad tech and what is just people being bad.
Interesting. Kate?
I'm gonna go with let's bring in the designers. Let's make it human-computer interaction, user experience-led AI, where we're putting a user at the center of it, and we're developing technology that takes into account things like usability, accessibility, ease of use, all of those things. And I think that that is something that we need to focus our efforts on. We've done the technical software engineering part. Now it's time to look at the user.
All right. Final word, Mike.
Yeah, so I'll offer a prediction, since we're talking predictions. I think there will be some developments in meaningful and thoughtful regulation over the next year. I worry a little bit there will be at the same time pressure to regulate or to enforce under existing regulations just because of potentially bad facts. I think Phil Harvey had a great quote this morning on one of his slides. When an algorithm messes up, I think the closest human gets blamed. And I won't be surprised if within the next 12 months you'll see some instances where there will be pressure on regulators, wherever they may be, to take action, to deal with what look like problematic issues, maybe not in an ideal or completely thought out way.
Great. Well, look, I hope that's been a fascinating panel to you. It certainly has to me, and we could have carried on. But I need to hand back to Antti now to sum up the day. But can we please thank our panel, Mike, Jenny, Catherine, Tom, and Kate in the normal way. Thank you so much.